So good evening, everyone. I'm Anthony Luscre, Kilo 8 Zulu Tango, and this is part 2 of Youth and Community in Amateur Radio. If you missed part 1 last week, it is recorded and on YouTube. This is my contact information. This is the link to the slideshow, tiny.cc/YIAR. You can shoot the QR code. I'll also show this at the end. So what I want to talk about tonight is amateur radio demonstrations for youth. Once you get your foot in the door, or once you get invited to an event, you want to make sure that you have something that's going to be of interest, something that you can handle. So let's talk about some things you should plan when you're planning your demonstration. You want to make things as fun and interesting as possible. You want to make sure your demonstrations of radio contain visual, internet, social media, gaming aspects if possible. Try and speak to some of the things that this youth will be used to. I think you'll see benefit from that. Plan your radio operations. If you're going to demonstrate the use of radios, which I strongly suggest you do if you can. Sometimes you can't do it, but if you can demonstrate radios and make contacts, you need to plan what you're going to do. Anyone can talk around the world with a simple cell phone, so the lure and magic of doing it with a radio are not there for today's youth. Just a warning. They're not going to be bowled over like you might have been when you saw the first contact made around the world on HF radio with voice. But if we add in a few elements, it suddenly becomes more fun and interesting. Besides audio, try and add other elements to your demo. Having an online presence. That might be things like having access to a DX cluster where you can see spots being posted, maps, interactive maps. They can all be very helpful. If you're doing FT8, having PSK reporters so they can see who's hearing the signal where around the world. Have visual aspects to it. I know that sometimes we think of amateur radio as being primarily an audio experience, but I'll talk about some ways that you can even make CW into a visual experience. So we'll do that in a few minutes. Also, tactical things. The lure of having a key the kids can push, even if it's a very simple key, never fails to get interest. So we'll talk a little bit about some tactical things you can do. And then interactive. Having interactive things that the kids can do, whether it's talking to someone on the radio, tuning a radio, or other things we'll talk about. So these are all things you want to keep in the background in your head. Let's talk about some ways you can actually do that. So first, let's focus on visual display addition to your activities. Things like DX clusters, world maps with gray lines on them, propagation tools like DX mapping, which shows where stations are being heard and what their call signs are, grid tracker. These are all good examples of visual things that are not necessary to make the contact, but will really be positive reinforcement for the people viewing the contact. It makes it a lot more alive for them. Maybe you don't care about those things yourself because you're only interested in making the contact, but they don't have the same understanding. So having a visual aspect to it makes it very helpful. A gaming aspect, if you can do it during a contest, I think that's the best time to demonstrate amateur radio is during a contest. But unfortunately, most of the time we're dealing with weekdays, and there's not that many weekday contests, but there are some. So let's talk about making CW visual. Well, this requires a little bit of extra effort, but not a lot, depending on what radio you have. For example, if you happen to have a Kenwood TS590SG, it has an online CW decode. See how it shows up right here where this normally second band shows up? That's kind of hard to see, especially if you have 50 kids in a classroom. It'd be really hard to see even with 2 or 3 people in the classroom. Fortunately, Kenwood has a free piece of software called the ARCP590G. This works with the Kenwood radio. It doesn't decode the Morse code, but it takes the display, it displays the decoded Morse code from the radio and puts it on a computer screen. So you can project this onto an overhead with I'm giving my age away here. You can project this with a LCD projector, and everyone can see it. So not only are they hearing it, but they're seeing it. Even if they're not used to what this sounds like, they'll see the translation here. So we can see here the Bob Patton N4BP was the station being worked here. You can also do something very similar with the Lcraft K3, KX3, KX2. Again, they have 7 characters, but you can port that out via a serial port and display it on a projector, and you can display as much as you want to. You can also use a software tool to decode CW from any radio that has the ability. It might not be perfect, but it is a lot better visual than nothing at all. So there's a number of different programs. And if you go to my presentation called Fun with Morse Code, I talk about a variety of decoders in that. Having maps and charts. And if you were at RATPAC just 2 weeks ago, I did a presentation on maps and charts for amateur radio. You can go to that link on the RATPAC site or go to our YouTube and get, I think there's 160 links in that of different maps and charts that you can download either to use on your computer, to print out, whatever you want to do with them. Show them awards you've won, earned along the way with interesting QSL cards. And one of the neat things you can do is scan your QSL cards, and you can show them in a slideshow as opposed to handing them out and getting them back with peanut butter and jelly on them, or maybe not getting them back at all. You can show everyone on the screen at the same time and explain what that card means and why that card has what it says on it. When you're choosing your mode of operation, consider carefully what you feel comfortable doing and what you think will make an impression with the group you're working with. Probably the most accessible thing is phone, because everyone understands voices. So we would think, oh, well, let's default the phone because everyone understands it. But we'll talk in a few minutes here about why that might not be the best idea. And I'm just going to pause for a second. I forgot to remind everyone, please turn your cameras on if you have a camera. I love to see your smiling faces because it's great feedback for me. So we'll look at phone, CW, digital, and satellite modes. So let's look at phone contacts first. They allow an easier exchange of information. So if you want to have your youth talking on the radio, phone is probably the way to go. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you want them to talk on the radio, you need to do a little bit of pre-planning. We'll talk about that later on. But one of the problems is if you're sitting there making contacts and they're just hearing you talk to someone, it's not going to make much of an impression because they're used to hearing people talk to each other all the time. So if you are going to do phone contacts, a couple things I suggest. First of all, explain what single sideband is. You don't need to explain it in technical terms, but you need to explain that it's going to sound a little bit different and how they have to get around that little bit of difference, and you also have to tune it in. If you want to get the kids on the air, so they're talking to someone else, you need to go through a few things with them first. Explain to them how phonetics works, because they're going to hear phonetics coming back to them, and they're probably going to want to use phonetics when they're giving the call sign. Explain to them that you don't want to do single word answers. You want to do full sentences. They don't have to be grammatically correct, but if you do yes, no, the other station never gets to hear what they say, especially with a kid's voice, which might be hard to hear. So tell them they need to give longer responses. They need to make sure they key the microphone before they talk and not release the microphone until after they're done talking. They need to speak clearly and loud enough into the mic. You need to explain some simple amateur radio abbreviations and jargon. You don't need to explain everything, but you're going to need to explain things like Roger, 73, and a few other things like a few Q symbols. Have a few off-air practice QSOs. There's nothing that says the first time they talk in amateur radio that they need to talk on the radio. So explain to them, or maybe even pair them off and have them try doing it before they get on the air. And it really, really shows once they get on the air. They're much more at ease, and it goes much more smoothly. Also, tell them that they are allowed to write down things. Maybe give them an idea what they might want to talk about and say, think of some ideas of what you'd like to talk about. Write them down on the paper so you don't forget what it is when it comes time to talk about it. I have a couple of things, and I think they're later, but just let me mention them right now. One of the things I do quite often, I always talk about a plan B. Well, sometimes my plan B is actually my plan A for voice contacts. I want to make sure I have someone on the other end that is going to be good at talking to the kids. And there's nothing wrong with it being your friend down the street. It doesn't have to be some exotic person they talk to. Let them hear some exotic stations, but let them talk to someone that you know is going to be comfortable with them and is not going to go off on some bizarre topic or reprimand them for something that they do. So there's nothing wrong with a plant on the other end of the radio. it can be a very, very positive experience, and it can avoid some very negative experiences. Please don't randomly choose someone to talk to on the air without talking to them a little bit first to make sure that they're going to be comfortable with it, because it's not fair to that person either. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. On CW, the kids will not understand CW, but that doesn't mean they can't learn a few key sounds. Send CQ a bunch of times and they'll be able to pick CQ out very quickly. The call sign that you're going to use, drill them with that call sign for a while and say, all you need to hear is when that station calls CQ, you listen for the CQ. As soon as he's done, I'm going to send my call sign, and then I need you to listen and see whether he answers us or not. And they'll be able to pick out that call sign, that at least part of it. They'll know whether you've been answered. So it's fun because they'll think they're copying all the CW, and it's not hard to get them. So make sure they know what CQ sounds like. Make sure they know what your call sounds like, and maybe tell them like 73 so they can listen for that at the end. That really gives them a lot of confidence. So some simple things like CQ, Roger, Roger, 73, your call sign can easily be taught to them. I mentioned visual before. Here's also another example, the $55 kit, the QCX from DX Lab, from QRP Labs. And I just got my QMX in the mail today. I haven't even got a chance to fire it up yet, but a multi-band CW radio with a built-in decoder. Oh, I mentioned the fun with Morris. This is the link to it. One of the reasons why I find kids get interested in CW is they like the idea of a secret code. And they find basic CW sort of interesting. So one of the things I like to do is have some way that they can send CW back and forth to each other. And I have a project called the clothespin key. I have all the instructions you need right here on this link in the presentation. Basically, it uses a chunk of 2x4, a clothespin, some brass thumbtacks. And if you can't find brass, you can use regular thumbtacks and just file the finish off of them, a computer buzzer, and a 9-volt battery and a battery holder. The most expensive item in here is the 9-volt battery, but we put these together in mass for under $2 each. You can also hook two of them up and make a telegraph if you want to, so they can be in separate rooms. Now, you don't have time to teach them how to do CW the right way, but you can teach them how to basically encode and decode simple messages. So here's the encoding chart. They just need to follow this and have them write out their message ahead of time with the dashes and dahs, the dits and dahs on it. Then when they're listening, tell them to simply go left or right, depending on whether they hear a long sound or a short sound. So if they hear da, da, they go this way, and then they hear dit, they go this way, so it's an N. If they hear da, da, dit, they go, there's a G. If they hear da, 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 it's an O. It's a simple way they can be sending their name back and forth in just 5 minutes to each other, and they'll get a big kick out of it. There's also a thumb texting key article that was put together by KL7BB, very similar, but instead of having a Morse code key, he has a thumb key that they can use like they're texting. Digital modes. Digital modes are great for mic shy youth and mic shy adults also. They'll find it very similar to their experience with texting. Some of them also find CW similar to texting. The visual display can be appealing to youth. It's computer oriented. It's point and click with your mouse. It's got a lot of good things going for it. It's short conversations, extremely short conversations, but a chance to work very rare stations. And with PSK Reporter, you can actually see where your signal is going, even if no one's answering you. So PSK Reporter will show you all the stations that heard your signal, how strong it was all the way around the world, even if they don't answer you. Satellites are the next mode. And one of the nice things about satellites is the low Earth orbit satellites that use FM can simply use a dual band handheld. So not an expensive endeavor. You can put together a homebrew antenna for a couple dollars, or you can get a commercial one for a lot more than that. But one of the neat things is you can do a lot of lessons with them. There's just tons of lessons. You can talk about satellite tracking and use some tracking tools. You can talk about space exploration. There's a lot of different things you can do. And oh, by the way, all they need is a tech license. So anyone with a license can operate satellites. So it's something that they can do that's beyond the local repeater. And I have a whole presentation on FM satellites and on a presentation called Life Beyond the Local Repeater for technicians that goes into a lot more depth on this. Next thing I like to do is, when possible, go portable. If I'm working with a scout group or someone that automatically goes outside and does things, why should I do it in a room? Let's take it outside and do it. So I have my little buddy pole antenna I can walk around with outside, and I've done that before when I'm working with scouts, and they get a big kick out of the fact that we're operating in an environment that they find interesting. I mentioned competition earlier, and if you're doing a demo on a contest weekend, or if you want to even do something like the CW Ops contest on Wednesdays, there's a lot of activity in a couple hours during the day. One of the things I strongly suggest is you set up your logging software so it uses online contest log books, so they can actually see the results online. So the online contest scoreboards will let you see how many people are making contacts and how many contacts they made, et cetera, et cetera. So I really strongly suggest you add this element if you are going to demonstrate contesting. If there's no contest, you can even run your own eyeball QSO party, and I have instructions on how to do that here. And basically what it is, let me zoom in a little bit on this. All you need is some DX QSL cards, or you can make up your own even, some envelopes, pens or pencils, some log paper. I make up log forms and then run off copies of them, a clipboard or something to write on. What I do is I put my cards in the envelopes and they pull out a random envelope, and that's the call sign they have to use for the eyeball QSO. They have to then look on their sheet that I gave them earlier with phonetics on it, because they have to figure out how they're going to say their call phonetically, because I required them to do that for clarity in the contest. After they get their call sign and they figure out what they're going to say, each of those people then tries to call as many other people as possible, using only their voices. Or if you want it, you can do it as a CW contest if you want with code oscillators, but that's a little beyond most of the kids. You could do the code oscillator thing at your next club meeting if you'd like to. So they use only their voices and they shout out and try and make as many contacts as possible. So I would yell, CQ, CQ, this is Kilo 8 Zulu Tango. And they can move around the room. They can yell as loud as they want. I set a time limit, usually 10 to 15 minutes, and they have to have a watch on, or they have to have a clock in the room. I always make sure there's a clock because most of them don't have watches and I don't want their phone in the way. So they have to use their log sheet and log down the time, the station they work, and then I always make up some sort of goofy exchange. What we do a lot of times, the simplest exchange is I'll use their initials. So each person has to exchange their initials in phonetic alphabet. So I would say, and they also give the location on their card. So I'd look at my card and say, Alpha Lima, Ohio. And they would know, and then they would go on, and they'd have to write all that information down. So it's basically just like doing a log. And I always have swag to give away, hats and stuff that I get at Hamfest, Morse code keys, things like that I give as prizes. There's a whole article on gamification amateur radio that you can go out and take a look at. I downloaded a copy of the PDF to my drive so that it's available. And it talks about gamification and amateur radio. Visual aids. As I already mentioned this earlier, scripts for students with suggested ideas to what to say on the air or have them write out their own scripts. Definitely a list of the phonetic alphabet so they can know what characters, what to say for each of the characters. As I said earlier, find a good station to carry out the two-way conversations. Make sure it's clear, strong, readable signal, and an agreeable operator. Pre-planned schedules, or ask a potentially good ham to QSY a plant. Have a backup plant station. The other thing about having a plant station backup in your area, it means that if the band conditions are horrible, you're still going to make contacts. Make sure it's someone who is comfortable talking with youth and has some ideas of what kind of questions to ask. have patience, minimize amateur radio abbreviations and jargon, have relatable experiences available to youth. So when I talk to youth, a lot of times I'll talk about my experience at the 1973 Boy Scout Jamboree when I'm talking to a Boy Scout group, and they get sort of a kick out of the fact that I was doing that 50 years ago, what they're doing right now. Or talk about sports, camping, travel. Avoid talk about the radio. They don't really care what model radio it is. They don't care how many watts you're running. They don't care what your antenna is. So avoid radio talk. Have a plan B in case of problems. Have backup equipment, radios and antennas. Always helpful to have multiple bands. If you bring only radio for one band and one antenna and that band is dead, you're dead. Have other modes. I remember one time there was a solar flare and everything was pretty much dead, but I had my computer and I had FT8 and I was able to make 2 contacts. They didn't know I had planned on making a voice contact and it didn't work. They didn't know I was going to try a CW contact and it didn't work. They just knew I made 2 contacts that day. And if I didn't have my computer loaded with the WSJTX on with me and my sound card adapter, I would not have been able to make a contact that day. So have backups. You're going to have a lot of time where you're not going to be able to provide 1-on-1 or even 1-on-5 attention to the kids. So you need some activities that they can do on their own. And the activity that I found that's best is listening on online software-defined radios. I put together a 4-page guide, and this goes out to the kids ahead of time. I usually give it to the teacher. Oops, I clicked on the wrong link, or I got the wrong link there. I don't have the right link. That's the link for the presentation. I'll have to fix that. This is the link we want. It's tiny.cc free RX. And I'll put this in the chat also. But the nice thing about this is not only can I have them do this activity that day, but they also can take this home and they can continue to do this activity with their interest. Remember I said before, you're going to have a certain percentage of the kids that are interested. Other ones are not going to care. But that kid who's interested, you've now sent home a super efficient radio with a great outdoor antenna for free. And there's multiple ones around the world and they can tune them in. So I put this together with instructions. Basically talks a little bit about what we're going to do. Then I have links to 2 main sites, WebSDR and Kiwi. Both of them have a couple hundred stations on them, so it's not a problem to find a station. They click on this link on WebSDR. They can pick any of these stations they want to use. I have a couple I suggest to them sometimes if they're having trouble finding one. I can go to the, give them a frequency to go to, or they can, I also give them a DX spotting. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And now we're on the radio. And now we can tune this radio. We can also change filtering. We can do a bunch of different things on this. And I'm going to tell you right now, most of the kids have never tuned a radio. So the whole idea of tuning a radio is going to be unique to them. So you have to explain how to tune in stations, explain that SDR, that single sideband thing a little bit ahead of time. To make it a little easier for them, I have a screenshot of what most of the controls look like, and we go over this ahead of time. I also have the one for Kiwi. But then in addition, I also have this link, Radio Garden, which is commercial radio stations. Much easier to tune in. But the whole idea, again, is they're tuning something in. The way this works is you simply spin the globe, and you click on any dot on the globe, and you will hear a local radio station.
We've got an abundance. Penn State is working towards something bigger.
This is interesting. There's a Penn State commercial
that can
in
help
India.
the world become something better.
But that's called Radio Garden. But then I also have information on shortwave listening. I have clusters. So if they're looking for stations, they can simply go out to this cluster. They can look and find a station. Its call sign is listed there and the frequency. So if they want to try and hear one of these stations, they can go to that frequency and try and hear this particular station. So they have to tune the radio in, but this gives them some idea of where to tune in. They can simply type that number in. So the whole idea of this online, free online tunable shortwave receivers, I think is a fabulous thing to do. And almost every school, when you go into their classroom, they're going to have Chromebooks, they're going to have a variety of computers, but kids can even do this on their phones. Like when you look at this link here this is the wrong link, but this is the link for the slideshow presentation. This is my grandson using his phone to tune in WebSDR in. So a great thing to do, and kids can work on this for a long time. They can work in pairs, they can work alone, and that gives you a chance to focus on the other kids who aren't doing that activity. Another great activity is fox hunting. Doesn't require licenses. You can hide foxes around all in the school. You don't necessarily have to be outside. We had a fox hunt at one of the schools. We had it hidden in a box near a trash can. The custodian came through, took the box out and put it in the recycle bin. And we went to find the radio and it was gone. So we had the kids actually use the fox hunting information radios and find the fox. Fortunately, it was still on and we tracked it down. So they thought that was very neat that we found it out in the recycle bin. There's a couple of links here on fox hunting. Also on making inexpensive antennas you can make yourself with tape measures. Soldering. This sort of surprised me when I asked the kids at the end of the year that I've been working with every week for a whole school year. I said, what were the top things you did? Number 1 was fox hunting. Number 2 was soldering. And we picked up a bunch of 99-cent to $2 kits on eBay, just bought like 70 of them. And we just had them available to the kids. And one of the things we found out really early is some of those cheap kits don't have all the components in them. So we might have to sort through them. But that wasn't even the thing. They weren't even so much interested in as what they were building is just the fact that they got to identify the components and solder the components onto the board. They just thought that was neat. We also brought in a bunch of junk electronics with some desoldering vacuum guns and let them desolder components. There's a bunch of simple projects you can put together yourself if you don't want to go with those pre-assembled kits. Crystal radios. I have 6 different sites on building crystal radios. School idea projects for kids. These are all links you can go to for more information. And there's just a ton of electronic kits out there. Simple projects like the Pixies actually gives you a CW transceiver. Now you need to defeat the transmit if you're going to let them just play around with this, but that doesn't mean you can't do that. And I even have a little article. I don't have it here on this thing, but I have an article on improving the Pixie to actually make it workable. I've picked these Pixies up for under $5. And there's a lot of components to solder, so a lot of good quality soldering time. Robotics. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with robotics and radio control. Remote sensors, including balloons, kites, submersible models, drones, etc. Drones, as we just happened to mention, there's a whole bunch of stuff on radio controlled drones. Balloon payload launch. You can watch this video later. I have some stuff on scouting here. There's a whole thing on troop program activities for scouting. Youth like videos. My grandson loves to watch YouTubes. Matter of fact, I keep telling him how many hits I have on one of my RATPAC YouTubes, and he's been very impressed that I have 12,000 hits on one of my YouTubes because he's only been able to get 100 on his YouTube that he posted. So I keep telling him it's up as it climbs each week. So there's some out here from Faith Hanna at hamradio.world. Although Faith has gotten a little bit older, she's not a 14-year-old extra class amateur anymore. I think she's now 19 or 20. But there's a bunch of videos out there on radio. Just go through them and look at them first. I put together some that I think you might find useful. Some of them are a little more technical than maybe you want, but some of them are just done very well. Even though they might not understand all the technicalities of the Nordic survival grid person, his voice is wonderful, and he has very good action things with camping and radio and stuff. So find some that might be of interest to youth. If there's youth involved, that's good, but it's kind of sometimes hard to find it. But then also things like Introduction to Electricity. There's lots of good
when I pour this blue liquid
videos
into
out
the
there.
clear one,
Let me
something
wait till
very
this commercial goes
interesting
away.
happens. Let's reach.
Today we'll learn about electricity. Visualize a different world where you couldn't turn on a light, a computer, energy. The wire is surrounded on both sides by a very strong magnet. On one side,
so a bunch of the videos available out there. You can also, one trick you can do is, you know, that commercial would start playing and all the other garbage on the side when you're in this YouTube site. If you embed the video in a Google slide, they will only see the video. They won't see the advertisements, and they won't see all the other distracting information and stuff on the side. You know, whenever you're in a video, you start seeing all these ads, and some of them are not very kid friendly.
Grammarly.
So you can avoid all that. Plus, when you embed them, you can also choose where you want the slide, the video to start and end. So you can set a time for starting and ending. And there's a whole thing here on safe use of YouTube with students that my old coworker before I retired, Eric Kurtz, put together. So you can use this for information. And it's great to embed the videos that way. Okay, so we talked a lot about doing the demos, but one of the things that's important is providing enough information after the demo so for those kids who are really interested could follow and go further. As again I said, maybe 35 kids, maybe 2 are going to be interested, but those 2 you want to make sure they have information. So make sure they know how to continue in the amateur radio quest if that's interesting to them. Plan future visits, asking about adding additional schools. Once you get your foot in the door at one school, tell the teachers, ask the people at the other elementary school if they'd like to have me come and present. And try and get people on the calendars way ahead of time. Provide online resources to the teachers so they can distribute them. Don't distribute them directly to the students. Give them to the teachers. Let them distribute them to the students. So I have, for example, I have a quick start guide on amateur radio. I have a free version of the No Nonsense Technician Class Study Guide as a PDF. I have my website. I give the teacher all this information. The Zach and Max comic books are wonderful. I have a lot of teachers that like these because they have a lot of reluctant boy readers in the 4th through 7th grade, and they'll sit and read these magazines that are actually at a much higher reading level because they see this anime-like art in them. So not only are they getting amateur radio, but they're also getting reading at a little bit higher levels, which is really good for them. And they're very sound, and there's 6 of them. They're available as comic books, as PDFs. I have all of them here. You can also have them as black and white so that you can use them as coloring books. I mentioned earlier the idea of licensing is probably not the best strategy to start with. It may not be effective for actually getting active hams. Just forcing a bunch of kids to get their license doesn't turn them into active hams, and they'll stop doing it after you go away. Develop interest first, then provide licensing opportunities for those that are motivated to want to continue. Motivation may take years. Here's a whole talk from a TED Talk on ideas for licensing of youth. And this person really talks about the whole idea of tinkering and hacking as a pathway into interest. Developing active lifelong hams requires not only teaching the class, but providing free VE sessions. Use the Laurel system so it's free to do the testing. Once they get a license, you must mentor them, provide operating opportunities, especially provide youth-oriented operating activities. And Katie mentioned this last week, not just the things you do, but do things that they want to do, especially with other youth. And I put together a link, and I'll show you that in a minute, to get to the Ohio Section YouthNet, which will be coming up on the 10th this weekend. Provide general class training available. If you don't do it yourself, make sure they know where they can find it. Some of the impediments for traditional classes are it's often hard for the youth to find time and transportation for non-school-based classes. So having them at the library might seem like a great idea, but they have to get there. Having at your local radio clubhouse may bring other problems, and maybe parents don't want to drop their kids off at some unknown location. So there's a problem around that. Online classes get around most of these things very quickly. And you can have hybrid where you have online most of the time and then have occasional in-person meetings where the parents could come along. So don't think that you're limiting yourself by doing online. Think of how you're enriching the program by doing online, and you can still do face-to-face activities. Long duration classes are a difficult commitment. So don't have a 12-week class and expect kids to sign up for it and be there all the time. There's just too many other things going on in their life. They're going to miss too many classes. You're better off with a little bit longer sessions and a much shorter duration of days involved. We found that 6 to 8 classes seems to be like the max we want to do, and that we feed all the information in. Some ideas for classes. If you have a school-based club, you can of course have classes there, hybrid or totally online classes. You want instructors who are experienced with teaching youth. Just everyone who teaches amateur radio might not be able to. And the worst thing I've ever seen is I saw this one group sit down and the entire first selection was all math. There was nothing but math. There was nothing of any type of excitement in it. It was like the most boring first lesson I've ever seen. And half the people didn't come back for the second lesson. So your first lesson really needs to be more about excitement and less about boredom. Integrate with other activities, scouting, merit badges. It's a great way if you have merit badge counselor involved, you can do both the merit badge and the licensing at the same time. A day camp, community programs, college course. Again, we're not limiting this to K through 12. I talked about that really important group, that 19 to 26-year-old group. If you can get your foot in the local college and offer a class, they might be interested in buying that. Not paying for it, but buying into the topic. If you use a hybrid or totally online class, we utilize Google Classroom, which most of the kids already are used to using, to provide the resources. And so this is the way we share the slides. This is the way we share the resources we want them to read. This is where we share the YouTube videos, et cetera, et cetera. It all goes into Google Classroom. You got one point of contact and they know where to go and they're already used to the routine. You can also record your live lessons so that students that miss can watch later. We don't use Google Meet for the online portion of the class. We use Zoom simply because there was a couple of things we like better about Zoom, but they work well together. We can upload our videos to YouTube when we're done, and they can get to them from Google Classroom. If you have instructors that are experienced with online teaching, it's very helpful, but it doesn't have to be. They can learn. Provide lots of videos for supplemental instruction. We always make sure that we have one extra video that's sort of a fun video about something that we talked about that day, but isn't really something they need to get for the license so they can watch it afterward. If things go well with outreach, first demo program, etc., then you might want to consider a school club. You need to identify a teacher or other school staff that's willing to head the project. I have some information here on school clubs, how to start a school club, amateur radio FAQ for parents. This is something that, I got to find that again. This is gone again. They keep moving this. It was a very nice letter to parents about what their kids were getting involved with amateur radio. I'm going to have to find that and fix that. I hate when things move. Okay. But these are all information on school clubs. There's also the Teachers Institute. If you find a teacher, tell them they don't need to know about amateur radio. They just need to be interested in amateur radio, and you'll do the training. And they can even go off for a free week of instruction from the ARRL through the Teachers Institute. They will get all sorts of resources, books, materials, etc. They also pay for their lodging, their meals, etc. And there's one coming up in October. So help them fill up. If you find a teacher that's interested, tell them you help them fill out the application, and that's a great way to get them trained. Clubs can support a school club with direct assistance with meetings and equipment, licensing classes, monetary support, providing library resources, including technical, operation, and fictional titles. Don't forget the fact that there's a lot of good probably there's more youth literature for amateur radio that's fiction as opposed to technical. So there's a whole series of books, including what's her name? Ada. I'm going to forget the name of it off the top of my head right now. The book is called Ada, the Scientist, but I can't remember the author's name. I'll have to dig that up. School Club Roundup is an activity where school clubs work each other in a contest format over a whole week, twice a year. There's also the School Club Radio Club Network. That is a group that tries to bring school clubs together so they can work together on different things, and it's a worldwide organization. Youngsters on the Air, Northern California Ham Kids, Yacht, which Katie mentioned last time, the Youth Amateur Radio Communications Ham Team. Goals: it's very hard to judge success with your efforts in youth and amateur radio, as there are many unknowns and future potentials for amateur radio interest activity. They might not happen this year. It might happen long after you don't know them anymore. Some goals to consider: positive exposure of youngsters to amateur radio, contribution to the education, their general education, development of relationships with schools or youth groups, develop community capital with positive press, etc. This is a great way for your club to get some positive press. Another positive outcome is increased membership for your club in the form of youth and family membership. So a lot of clubs forget the fact that if you get kids involved, quite often their parents will become licensed, and you're then dealing with getting more adults in addition to more kids. Goals may vary depending on the age of the group you're working with. Licensing of youth is one possible indicator, but I suggest a much better indicator is long-term involvement. If your goal is active hams, not just licensing, mentoring is extremely important. What do you do if you can't get your foot in the door? Someone asked this last week, so I went out and found this little slide here. What happens when the door gets slammed on your foot? You need to explore other venues and groups that serve youth. Don't think that schools are the only place you can get to youth. Plan your own youth programs. It's often easier if you can partner with other organizations, and it might even be the school you were trying to get your foot in the door. They might be willing to work with you on a program outside the school day if they're not responsible for it. Summer day camp, weekend events, after school programs, library programs, latchkey programs, and you can even go with all online programming so the kids can go home and join your group via online connections. The mentoring and elmering part is the way you get new licensees on the air, not just licensed, but on the air. And here's that link I talked about earlier with Technicians Life Beyond Repeaters. It goes into great detail on different things you can do with a technician license, including the satellite communication. I have a slideshow that I'm actually doing this presentation for the QSO Today Expo on Saturday called Buying an Amateur Radio Transceiver. That's one of the things when you start working with new people, remember that they're not going to have any idea what they need to buy or how they need to find it or what they're going to do to get the equipment they need. Here's some links I mentioned earlier. The collegiate radio group for that 19 to 26-year-old group, Youth in the Americas. I'm sorry, YOT in the Americas, Youth on the Air in the Americas. Now, there's two links out there. Please do not use the qsl.net/N6JRL link. Use the link that I provided here. It actually takes you to the official site as opposed to a site that is semi-official and not always in agreement with this site. No further comment needed, but just use that. Don't distribute this site. AWRL listing of youth nets. You can go to the AWRL site and you can get a link that has some youth nets in it. But you can also just click on this link and look what I did, Katie. I put together a one-page document that tells them how to get to the net. And you can use this link also too. But it meets on a repeater that's local to us in the Ohio area, but that doesn't matter because anyone can get it in via Echolink anywhere around the world. So this link right here will get you into the Ohio section YouthNet. Opportunities for joint on-the-air activities include contesting, field day, public service events. Use that youth to help you when you got all those old tar guys that are trying to put up antennas at field day. Welcome into the larger ham radio community. Continue educational opportunities. Continue providing chances for them to advance in their license classes. Some non-air activities you might want to consider: antenna building and installation, coax, power, and other cabling. This is something that's always difficult for new hams, is to get everything put together that they need to do. So assistance there, assistance with logging, QSLing, awards, software, etc. These are all things that you can help out with. Now, that just beyond youth, that 25 to 35-year-old group can be very fruitful. They're done with college. They have more time to pursue outside interests. They're beginning to have their own income. They're looking for career networking opportunities, and they're looking for activities to replace school, sports, clubs, etc., especially if they now have a sports injury, so they should not be out playing, pick up basketball every day. So this group can be very fruitful. I think some of the keys, if you want to pursue the 25 to 35-year-old group, is to emphasize the networking aspect of it and the job opportunities that are involved by meeting the people that are in amateur radio. The competitive aspect of contesting can fit in very well with some of these athletes who now can't go out and perform on the athletic field. They can now be competitive in the amateur radio field. And some of the best contesters out there right now are some of these people in this, I'll say, 20 to 35-year-old range. Some phenomenal contesters that are coming up. Encourage couples to get involved by stressing that amateur radio is a great activity for both genders. And please be responsive to everyone's social needs. Don't discriminate based on gender, race, religion, etc., etc. I think some of the keys to pursuing this group also include outdoors and adventure. Soda, POTA are really big among this group. Contesting, rovers, fox hunting. Disaster preparedness is another way to go. A group that you might want to tap into is your local GMRS group. Find your local GMRS emergency group and see if they're interested in getting their amateur radio license. It's a very easy step from there into amateur radio. Digital modes are very popular with this group, but not just some of the more mundane things, very esoteric things in some cases, like satellite operation, non-traditional modes. There's a whole big thing now called short. It uses very high microwaves to bring back telemetry from satellites and objects on the moon. So you can be very technical with this group. What else can you do? You can become a merit badge counselor for your local scouting district. You can share your experiences with ideas with me, and I'll include them in the Ohio Section Journal articles, and I'll include them in my future presentations. As Ohio Section Youth Coordinator, I'm happy to work with you and your club, no matter what section you're in. And if you have someone that's just became a youth coordinator in your section, I'd be happy to work with them and getting them geared up. These are links that I have on my website. I showed them to you last time. These are some stuff on my kids' radio zone. I also have some scouting information. I'm not going to go into all these right now. Some quick start amateur radio stuff from my website. These are all resources on youth from the ARRL, these blue pages. And that brings us to the end of section 2. So you can shoot the QR code, get the tiny.ccyiar link. I'll go ahead and take questions, comments, suggestions, etc. Let me check the chat first here.
Landmark.
Oh, you are here. Great, Barry. I didn't see you were there. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Barry.
Landmark is something about the W flag. And I know we've talked about club events other than field day in publicly accessible places where you can bring parents and kids together and show them. So it doesn't have to be a field day thing, but you can go out into a public park and set up radios and invite kids and parents to come around and socialize and show off equipment and stuff like that.
And that's been very popular in our area recently, and I think that's a really good activity to do.
We have one club that's doing balloons once a month. It's really interesting, but they now know to contact the FAA before they do it. Francina wants to know how she can find out the youth coordinator in her area, and it's KN6LOA.
Yeah, if you go to the ARRL website and you do a search for youth coordinator, it'll give you the information on section youth coordinators and what they do. But I think to find the one you need, the better way to do that is to go to, what section are you in? Well, you can just type in sections. It'll give you all the sections. And then once you're in the sections portion, you go to your section in this little drop-down menu. What state is she in?
I don't know, it's KN6LOA. So,
okay. Do you want to unmute and let me know? Is it Francina? Yeah, what section? Where do you live?
Yes, I live in California.
What part of California? There's 6 sections in California.
I don't know which section.
Here, let me show you what they are. There's East Bay, Los Angeles, Orange County, Sacramento Valley, San Diego.
San Joaquin Valley. The one lower, San Joaquin.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Let me go back here again. Yep, I jumped a little too quick. Here we go. San Joaquin Valley. So when you get to this page, this is all the people that are in your section, and they should have at the bottom here.
don't always.
They don't.
They
don't have it here.
Nowhere.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you email me, I will find it for you. Or the other thing you can do is you can just call the ARRL and ask who the section person is, or you can contact your section manager, which is John Litz. And
I know him. But,
okay, ask John.
To do Jamboree in the Air on October, so it is the first time for me, so I'm very interested how to go about.
I can tell you who it probably is. Let me see real quick here. This is from September 2001, so it's not completely up to date. Let's see here, San Joaquin Valley. What's the abbreviation for San Joaquin Valley? No.
SJV.
Yeah, there's no one listed on this list. So definitely contact your section person and ask them if they have someone that's been appointed since then. Or if they don't have someone who has the official title, who's filling in for that particular position.
Mhm.
That's one of the problems. There's about 30 of the 70 sections that don't have a full-time youth coordinator. So talk to your section managers and say, yeah, we need to have a youth coordinator who's active, not only active with schools, but with scouting, with youth groups, et cetera, because some of them are only scouting, some of them are only youth groups, some of them are only schools. You need to have someone. So talk to your section manager and, ask them what the situation is.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Yeah, local churches is a great place to go also. Youth groups at churches. And one of the things that's interesting, a great tie-in for churches, by the way, if you're looking for a good tie-in with youth groups, a lot of churches do missions. So they have people overseas. And the whole idea of just whether you contact that missionary directly, but just the whole idea of international communication can be very appealing to them. Let's see. If you live in, okay. Okay. Other questions? We have someone to N3XU. Gene, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Gene, number 3 X-ray uniform Sierra here in glorious Killeen, Texas. My question is, I don't mean to sound like a Debbie Downer, but everybody's human. Amateur radio operators, the children, the teachers. We set up outside. We, let's say, for example, set up a vertical antenna. And for some reason, it falls down and it hits a teacher, it hits a student. Not so much me, I'm not worried about. But where does it come into liability there?
Your
Obviously,
club,
the student can sign a waiver, but how does it come into liability? I realize that this might
yeah,
vary
your
from school district to school district.
every club needs to have liability insurance for activity. So make sure your club has liability, even though it might not fall into you, it might fall into the school, but your local club should have club liability for events like that. So I would check with them first.
All right, thank you very much.
Mhm.
I just,
Other,
again, don't mean to Debbie Downer,
yep.
but
Oh, I agree.
it happens.
Yes, it does. Other questions, comments? Katie, you want to have some words of wisdom you'd like to share again? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. I see Hannah and Emma just asked in the comments what contests are good for youth. If the youth are licensed and they qualify, the rookie roundup is really good because it's kind of, I don't want to say like it's a beginner contest, but the exchange is a little bit simpler and it's not as much pressure. Other than that one, I would just check the contest calendar, and honestly, if you can just jump in, you don't have to operate like the whole contest when you're getting started. Like even if you just do a couple hours of one, that's really good too.
And I think another good contest is your state QSO party. When your state is doing its state QSO party, is probably another good one to get in. And again, you don't have to operate by yourself. You can operate in as a group. Anything else, Katie?
Does anyone have any questions? Maybe?
I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
We found that there were a number of people who misunderstood the rules for the school club roundup and did not understand that individuals are welcome. In fact, more than welcome, because without the individuals participating in the school club roundup, the schools and other clubs have very few people to talk to.
Yeah, that's definitely I don't know, an issue, but it would be really good to have a little bit more publicity about the school club roundup because I don't think a lot of the people who are operating all week, like I know my school club operates every year, and there's always like one or two people that are on the whole week, and we talk to them every year. So it'd be really nice if they like knew that they could enter as an individual. So some publicity there would definitely be good.
Yeah. So everyone here needs put this on their calendar, the week of October 16th to 20th. Get on the air, especially in the early afternoon when a lot of the school clubs are on, and try and make some contacts. 40 meters seems to always work pretty well with this group because you're getting mostly regional type of things, but sometimes 20 also. But in the afternoon, 40 and 20, get on and try and make some contacts. Look for clubs, watch your local DX cluster because people will spot them when they see students. And if they're not spotted, make sure you spot them so that other people can find them. I had a really fun time. I was driving back from Columbus, which is about a 2-hour drive, and I had the radio in the car, and I made state school club roundup contacts the whole way home. It was very fun. So definitely get on the air and make contacts. And the information is here. I'll put this link in the chat. Other questions or comments before I turn into a pumpkin in 2 minutes? If you're interested in contesting, let me put the link here in the chat. I'll be doing the Palmero Amateur Radio Club. Palomar, I keep pronouncing that wrong. Palomar Amateur Radio Club. We get the link. That'll be coming up at 10 o'clock. My time, 7 o'clock Pacific time. Any other questions? Well, thank you all. I hope these 2 weeks have been useful. Please feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to, work with you. I've gotten a couple phone calls and a couple emails since we did this, and it's been a great activity. Oh, Barry, Barry mentioned there is a gentleman in Florida, a KN4. I can't remember his call. KN4, I think it's JGE or something like that. He's involved in scouting, and he has 9,000 scouts he's going to be working with during the next 3 months. So he can always use help. And he's also has just a treasure trove of knowledge and ideas. Barry, do you know what his call sign is? I forget.
I don't remember his name, but I know what he's doing, and he's doing a fantastic job.
Yes. He's a KN4, and I think it's JGE, but I can't remember for sure. But he was at the Orlando club meeting this evening when I gave a presentation there, and that reminded me because I had met him at the Hamcation a few years back. Okay, I'm gonna have to say 73 because I'm gonna have to run here.
Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and leave. If you want Katie to answer more questions, she's better than I am anyway.
Thank you, Anthony.
Well, you're welcome. We'll see you guys. 73.
Does anybody have any questions for me specifically?
I have a question.
Yeah, Katie, I do. This is Gene into the XUS.
Okay, go ahead, Gene. And then
Yeah, at your school, do you have antennas up on the roof, or do you have masts attached to the side of the building? How does that work for you?
So we actually just had a kind of a new project. Over the summer, we've been working with DX Engineering and some local businesses for almost 2 or 3 years at this point. So over the summer, we actually got to put our antenna project in place. I have a picture of it now. We just got it up, but we just installed a tower. So we have a 60-foot tower at the school right now. We have I forget the exact name of it, but we have a beam for I want to say 10, 20, 15, and 17. So we are super, super lucky to have that. Before that, though, our setup was a telescoping mast and then just a G5RV, which obviously doesn't work quite as well, but for the week of the school club roundup, it worked well enough that we were able to make a decent number of contacts. So I know a lot of schools, if you have a station at the school, a lot have hex beams, so that's also a really good option.
All right, thank you. That sounds like a pretty ambitious project. During the installation phase, were there a number of students doing it, or was it just professionals when it came to the mast?
So we were very, very lucky that this all worked out during the summer. because if we'd tried to do it during the school year, there would have been a lot of outside people just walking around the whole time. One of the local businesses, RAA Data, came in and they donated all of their time. So there have been a lot of organizations and businesses that have been super generous with it, but they came in and did everything for us just to make sure we have everything like very nice, neat, tidy. So we're very lucky
That's
to have.
outstanding. I mean, that's great support for for one school. Very ambitious project, and I hopefully y'all have great luck with it and success, and maybe someday be hearing y'all.
Yes, we're on. We try to get on during lunch times every day. So if people want to come operate, we can do that. But yeah, we've had a ton of super generous donations from DX Engineering and local businesses. So we've been really very well supported.
Great. Have you ventured or tried out 10 meters yet?
I do a little bit on 10 meters. My main mode is CW, so I'm on 20 a lot, but I do 10 every once in a while.
Okay,
Evie,
great.
what's the club station?
The club's call sign is K8LPS, Kilo 8 Lima Papa Sierra. And we'll be on the week of the school club roundup and usually around noon as well.
So we were curious to know, at your school, when you guys do the school club roundup, what are your primary modes? You do CW. My guess is that others in your group are probably have different areas of focus. So what is the primary, or what is the range of what you guys do?
So we have a lot of SSB. The kids that we're getting in our club are mostly middle school, and usually the majority of them don't have licenses. So SSB is the fastest and easiest way to get them on the air and get them interested. We have tried digital modes a little bit. We don't use them quite as much. I do a little bit of CW, but our club does not have anyone else right now who does CW. So if you're hearing our club on CW, it's probably me. If it's not, we might have a problem. Other than that, mostly just SSB, just because it's super fast and super easy, and it's also really exciting. A lot of the kids in our club actually, like when we did do digital modes, preferred SSB because you could like hear the other person and like you knew you were talking to another person so much as like just hearing a digital mode. So it's SSB is primarily where we are.
Yeah, I have an unusual situation at W2CXN at Brooklyn Tech. Our shack is at the back of a classroom that is in use for regular classes during the whole day. We can only do exclusive operation after school is over. So what we've been doing is a mix of digital during the classroom time, and then we go to sideband after school is ended for the day. And it works out pretty well. And I invite everyone. We don't have much of an antenna, but we have I hope, a rejuvenated W2CXN this year, because we really were knocked down by COVID.
Yeah, we actually have the same situation with the shack. My mom teaches at the high school, so we have the radio and everything in the back of her room. So if I'm in there doing CW during lunchtime, I have to have headphones in. But other than that, we mostly just operate after school because a lot of the times she teaches in the high school, whereas most of our club is middle school, and the buildings are just connected. So the middle school will come down after the school day, and it's kind of hard to get the middle schoolers out of their classes like during the day, just because the middle school and high school, while they're connected, they are like two separate buildings. And so just like getting kids in and out of classes is kind of a pain. So we just have them come operate after school, and that usually works out a little bit better. Does anyone else have any questions?
This is pretty good. I stepped out of the room for just a moment to come back in, and the athlete turned into somebody else. I like it.
Yeah. Any more questions before we wrap things up, or are we good?
I think we're good, Katie and Dan. Everything is good in chat.
Yeah, that's good. Katie, I really appreciate you doing this. I hope to see you on here as soon as much as you can. I think we've got some more of these kind of things, and I'd like to be sure that you participate with them. All right. With all that, I'm going to say 73s to everybody.